Hello and welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started because it's 4 o'clock. I have a couple of announcements before we start the talk today. I just wanted to say Miguel Altieri is brought to you by New World Agriculture and Ecology Group at Cornell, the Society of Horticulture Grad Students, SOHO, and the Soil and Crop Student Graduate Student Association. So there are a couple things in terms of announcements for upcoming events, so go ahead and grab one. This is just our group's website. We run a sustainable agriculture book group and also food practicums and cheese making and kind of fun stuff like that. Also, the newly formed nonprofit Sustainable Agriculture Education Association is hosting its 3rd national conference this summer in Ames, Iowa. We hosted the 2007 conference. It was a blast. I would really recommend it if you're interested in either teaching or learning sustainable agriculture, because it's a very inclusive group. So that's July 15th to 17th in Ames, Iowa. Grab a little save the date card. And then Dr. Altieri is actually in town for the Visible Warnings, the World Food Crisis and Perspective Conference, which starts tomorrow and goes all tomorrow and all Saturday. It's a free conference. It's open to anyone who wants to come. It's free. I already said that, sorry. And yeah, so we have the agenda in back for you to check out, and I would highly recommend that. And then Newegg is hosting a follow-up community action event on Sunday from 2 to 5 in the Presbyterian Church, and all that information is on our website. And we're going to have a panel discussion with local and international people working on food justice issues. So we hope you can join us. With that, here's Jackie to introduce Miguel. Okay.
I'm just going to project. I think everyone can hear me. I'm very happy to be here today to introduce Miguel Altieri, professor and entomologist at the University of California, Berkeley. Miguel is a pivotal figure in the field of agroecology, a field that looks to explicitly understand agriculture as a result of the interaction between humans and nature, and also to design systems that are sustainable, socially just, economically viable, environmentally safe, and culturally diverse. Such values, justice, sustainability, cultural and biological diversity, Miguel has really shown in his career that good and innovative science can be conducted while respecting and advocating these values. Originally from Chile, Miguel has been called a messenger from the South, conducting extensive academic work here in the United States, as well as lecturing and meeting around the world with figures that include Pope John Paul II and Prince Charles, while still spending as much as 6 months a year working directly with small and traditional farmers. Working with these farmers, he has offered his expertise and coordinated a variety of educational opportunities, as well as using these experiences to learn from and with them, and to bring their agroecological innovations, both old and new, to the attention of the academic world in the global north. Miguel served as the General Coordinator for the United Nations Development Programme's Sustainable Agriculture Networking Extension Program, as Chairman of the NGO Committee of CGIAR, a visiting expert with FAO in Rome, and is current President of the Latin American Scientific Society of Agroecology, or SOCLA. He has been an invited professor at the University de Córdoba, the Universidad Iberoamericana de Andalucía, the Universidad de La Plata in Argentina, and the Universidad de Chile, as well as Green Professor in Residence at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. He has also received an honorary doctorate from the National University of Cajamarca in Peru. So maybe you can understand why, when I found out I was introducing Miguel a couple days ago, I got a little bit nervous. In addition to his accomplishments, he's someone whose research has had a great impact on mine and, of course, many other people through his actions, his teaching, and his writing. When I started out in ecology, those many years ago, last year, I didn't know where to find research that took a holistic view, integrating detailed ecological knowledge with important social, economic, and political factors. Of course, once I found some of Miguel's over 250 published articles, book chapters, and technical reports, 24 of which he published before he finished his PhD at the University of Florida in 1930, and found some of the 12 or more books he's written, well, Miguel's work quickly taught me another useful lesson, which was the importance of writing down detailed references. Because, man, if you write down Altieri 1987 and you come back to it, that's a whole afternoon trying to figure out which exact 1987 article you were trying to find. So I've learned a lot from Miguel's work in the past, and I look forward to learning a lot more this afternoon. It's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Miguel Altieri.
think the last time I was in this campus was when I was an entomologist. And I met illustrious researchers like many that are here present, including our colleague here, who also I learned a lot from. Actually, I applied to graduate school here in Cornell many years ago. I won't say how many, but David came and told they don't want me as a graduate student. My loss, I guess. But anyway, I'm not going to talk about entomology today, and I'm going to talk about how farmers, small farmers, especially in Latin America, are confronting the food crisis. And I call it confronting the food crisis from the campesino trenches because the peasant movement really feels that they're at war against the industrial agricultural model, especially biofuels and transgenic crops as a direct confrontation against their livelihoods. And you know, there's a lot of talk today, and actually this weekend we're going to have a huge conference on why do we have a food crisis. First of all, it's not new. It didn't happen last year. It's been going on for many, many years. And there's a lot of people that have done analysis that go all the way from the proximate causes like climate change and rising meat consumption in China and India, you know, low grain reserves, peaking the price of oil, speculative behavior on the commodity markets, because a lot of these guys that were seeing that, you know, we were going to have an economic crisis, they started investing in commodities. And then, you know, the rise of agrofuels. And really, all we have done, not only now, but always, is we respond to the symptoms of the food crisis. So we see that food prices start peaking, and therefore we produce more. Because the problem is not production, it's actually, as you know, distribution. But we produce more. But when we produce more, then we return to low prices, which discourages small farmers and marginalizes them even further. And then we increase the dualization of the farming sector. That's exactly what's happening in Latin America. You know, with increasing food production, with subsidized agriculture, we dump our rural production. In Mexico, farmers cannot compete. They cannot produce at the level of the price of the corn that is down there, coming from the United States. And then we wonder why we have so many Mexicans in California, for example. But at the same time, there is the dualization of the farming sector, where the large-scale farmers, you know, keep reproducing and at the expense of the small farming sector. And the results, well, I'm not going to go over this huge list, but basically there's a loss of food security. There's trade liberalization, immigration. The big corporations make a lot of money, and there is actually food surplus. And but this, as I said, is not new. And what has been pervasive is the assumptions that we make about why the problem exists. And it's really interesting to see how, for example, new actors like Gates Foundation, who not only started the Agro project in Africa with this same assumption, Malthusian assumption, but now has penetrated NSF with a big program called BREAD. I don't know if you heard about it, which is basically to promote genetic engineering in the third world to solve the problem of hunger by increasing production, because they see the gap between the hunger and population growth in a Malthusian way, and the only way, therefore, to solve the problem is by increasing food production with high input technology developing in the north, and the program requires replacement of local varieties for improved ones, and peasants need to be modernized. And this has been the history. If you look at what has happened in Latin America from the 1950s, there's always been an agricultural revolution that has led the way. On the one hand, agronomic revolutions, you know, planting dates, planting distances, etc. You know, then the green revolution with their fertilizers and chemicals, and then biotechnology, and then now agrofuels. And what is interesting is that, you know, I start thinking, and I'm going to show there's a lot of reports that have come out from the World Bank even, from UNCTAD, from FAO, the ISTD report not recently that just came out saying agroecological alternatives, organic methods can be as productive, although the problem is not production, but they can produce as much food in a much more sustainable way. Why is it that we're pushing biotechnology? Why is it that we're pushing chemical fertilizers? All these technologies that peasants cannot afford anyway. Well, if you go back to the original goals of the Rockefeller Foundation in Mexico, you can see that the problem was political. Look at what it says. The agricultural experiment station, this is the El Batán field down in where CIMIT is, was going to be established, would help the farmers to adjust to an increasingly competitive world market. Second, they will rationalize and systematize his operations. That is a conservative alternative to more radical schemes. What were the radical schemes that were going on? Land reform. Cárdenas was promoting land reform. So how do we subvert agricultural revolutions is with creation of a technology that is not scale neutral. And then, you know, there are critics now. There are plenty of us that are criticizing the Green Revolution and agrofuels and biotechnology, but there were people at that time, Carl Sauer, professor at UC Berkeley, part of the team of Rockefeller Foundation in the 1940s, that went down with them. They took him basically as a guide, because the guy knew a lot about Mexican agriculture. Look at what he said there in a minority report. A good aggressive bunch of American agronomists and plant breeders could ruin the native resources for good and all by pushing their American commercial stocks. The example of Iowa is about the most dangerous of all for Mexico. Unless Americans understand that, they better keep out of this country entirely. You know what they did? They fired him and they put somebody from Cornell actually in that and the Green Revolution proceeded. Okay? Well, Gates hears all this stuff all the time. And, you know, they have smart people there. Why are they pushing this thing? And what is really interesting is that CIMIT, this is the campus of CIMIT, for those of you that have been there, was established like all the international centers of CGIAR, like, for example, you go to SIA in Colombia, flat soils, the best soils, with irrigation and everything. And they started, you know, their Green Revolution approach, high-yielding varieties, high inputs and so on. And right behind here, La Purificación. If you go to La Purificación, right behind CIMIT is an area where farmers are growing agroforestry systems, soil conservation practices. They're in hillsides. They're not in flat soils, and they're using, you know, all these technologies that are traditional. And they're recycling their biomass, and they're using intercropping systems and so on and so on. And obviously, the scientists that came there ignored this totally. Now, you go 30 kilometers away, and you find this. In Mesquite, you find the chinampas. In these chinampas, which still exist today, farmers now are producing things like verdolaga, which we try to eliminate with herbicides, you know. But it's a major source of income and also food for people, including amaranthus and many other crops. But what is really interesting is that maize yields in chinampas in the 1950s were about 3.5 to 6.3 tons. At that time, the U.S. average yields were in 1955 2.3. These guys were supposed to teach these farmers how to grow corn. Okay? And 1 hectare could produce enough food for 15 to 20 people. And one chinampero could successfully farm almost 1 hectare producing food for 12 to 15 people. These were record yields and integrated systems that did not depend from external inputs or expertise, and they did not need to be modernized. Why is it that we want to change a system at that time when it was almost twice productive? And was not only producing corn, it was producing all kinds of other things, including fish. So what happened, obviously? The Green Revolution went ahead, and less than 20% of the peasants adopted HIVs. Technology were imposed. Technology were not appropriate to the needs and circumstances, and they were not scale neutral. We know that they favor large farmers. The second assumption is that economic integration of traditional farmers into a global system is a positive step that enables increased production, income, and well-being. With the right incentives, small farmers will become more competitive, export more, and make a profit. So, okay, the problem with the Green Revolution was, you know what, these guys are just growing corn, that doesn't generate income. Why don't we make these guys entrepreneurs so they become competitive in the world market? So they came out with the non-traditional export crops to increase export earnings by capturing new specialized markets. So you go to Central America, and this was mostly pushed by USAID. You can see that they started growing. They changed percent increase in things like pineapples, strawberries, roots, melon, papaya, ginger. 251, 500%. They started increasing. And then, little by little, as the area started increasing and the production started increasing, also the inputs and the cost of production. This is corn and beans. This is the cost of production. And as you get more and more specialized, you go to snow peas and broccoli and Brussels sprouts, you can see that the cost of production go up. And this are pesticides, basically, which most of them are banned in the United States and used down there. And then finally you end up with the same story that happening everywhere, which is the technological treadmill. You produce more, but your cost of production go up, and therefore you cannot pay the debt that you incurred in order for you to increase production. And then pesticide imports started increasing, not only with cotton, but also with non-traditional agro-export crops. Well, then the biotechnology people showed up and they said, well, biotechnology will dramatically increase production. Transgenic crops will allow farmers to control pests without chemicals, overcome soil fertility problems, but this is perhaps the most important one and most focused in Africa. It's essential to feeding the world. Well, first of all, if you look at this, and I think that you guys generate this graph here, isn't it? Isn't the center here? No. Try James. Isn't he here? Anyway, it doesn't matter where he is, but the point is that there has been, the first thing that they show is that this is the most incredible example of adoption of technology ever in agriculture. It has been exponential, there's no doubt. From 0 hectares in 10 years, you get to almost 140 million hectares. That's unprecedented. Most of it in the United States, as you can see, in the developing countries going up, that's mostly Brazil, India, China, and so on. And 65% of all this is soybean, which is Roundup Ready soybean, produced by Monsanto. Okay? Now, if you're going to feed the world, how is it that you're going just corn, which 70% goes to feed animals and the rest goes to feed cars? Soybean, the same. Mostly goes to China, the soybean from Argentina and Brazil, also for biodiesel. Canola doesn't feed anybody, and cotton doesn't feed anybody. So I don't know who they are feeding with this 140 million hectares. The consequences are huge. First of all, this is for example, you can see in Santa Cruz, 1976, after soybean, and then obviously after the transgenic soybean. This is not only transgenic, but soybean expansion, but then transgenic soybean started dominating. And there has huge deforestation, as you can see there. And it's the entry point to a system called no-till agriculture, which everybody says that is very sustainable because it conserves soils, but condemns farmers to monoculture, Roundup, and it doesn't conserve farmers either. It conserves soil, but not farmers. And I'll show you why. This is in Argentina. This is the way it goes. And probably in the Midwest of the United States, you have corn or wheat. You come in with glyphosate, with Roundup, and you spray it as many times as you want. It's resistant, obviously. So, farmers facilitates weed management. But it hooks farmers into a system. This is no-till agriculture. This is expansion in area. This is the soybean. You have to get the soybean in order to get into the system. But if you get this soybean, then you get this glyphosate. And if you get all this, then you have to have the machinery in order for you to get in. Because otherwise, there's an economics of scale. As you can see here, the number of hectares went up, but the numbers of farmers went down. So when you see those figures showing that the hectares of transgenic crops are expanding, you have to see the other figure, which is the farmers going down. Because in Argentina, if you don't have 500 hectares minimum, you're not able to get into a business because you cannot afford machinery. So it creates economies of scale. It happened in California with the tomato harvest. All the farmers under 140 acres went out of business because they could compete. And then farmers get condemned to using Roundup. And that's basically what you can see in Argentina. But they say it's good. You talk to Monsanto, they say, well, but we took atrazine and 2,4-D out of the business because they're very toxic chemicals, and therefore we're using this one that's not very toxic at all, environmentally sound. And what happens is that when you start spraying this stuff, you create what the pesticide trend always taught us, resistance. So in a lot of fields in Brazil, in Argentina, in Paraguay, this is what you see. Coniza, for example, becoming a major resistant weed. But the worst weed of all is this one, is soybean, transgenic soybean of the previous year. Because you have to use this machinery, when you harvest, you drop seeds all over the place, and this soybean weed, super weed, comes out of place, and they have to control it. Guess what? You cannot control it with Roundup. You have to use 2,4-D. So we get into the transgenic treadmill. And obviously, there's many other effects. I'm not going to go into the effects that Roundup has on soil biology and also on amphibians. But other crops, like BT corn, can have very important impacts. And I know that there's a professor that we research here and got in a lot of trouble for asking those kinds of questions. Why? What would be the non-target effects, for example, of these products, just like Ignacio Chapel in Berkeley too. But basically, the main problem is genetic pollution. And there's a lot of interesting stuff that is coming out now, published by scientists in Mexico in molecular ecology, actually saying that Chapela was correct, that there was contamination. And the main issue is that there is a cost. If you're going to express, if traditional variety is going to express this characteristic, it's going to do it at the expense of another characteristic that is important for them, like, for example, drought resistance. The other assumption is biofuels are an effective alternative to vegan oil. It will mitigate climate change, it will enhance income for farmers, and will be grown in marginal lands and not displace food crops. Well, what is really interesting about this is that for the first time, we have an agro-industrial complex that is going to be determining what's grown, where, and how in the world. Not ever before had all these corporations with different interests being together determining the fate of agriculture in the future. You have the big grain companies, you have car companies, you have the petroleum companies, and you have the biotechnology companies all working together in alliances, influencing research agendas in public universities. Berkeley just received $500 million from BP to do biofuels. And most of the biofuels that are going to be developed are going to be transgenic. Okay? There's no room here to do research on alternative technologies or on the social or ecological impacts of this technology. So you can see that the major actors are the US, Argentina, and Brazil, especially in the production of ethanol. And who are the ones that need this stuff? Are usually, as you can see here, the countries that use most of the energy. The OECD countries, those 20 guys that are meeting right now, they use 61% of the world energy. So they need the energy that is going to be produced in the future. But where are they going to produce it? Well, most of it in developing countries, because they don't have the land available. So this is what's happening. There's an expansion, as you can see there, of the global area harvested. It's around 800 million hectares right now. This is how they are expanding. And because it's done at the expense of land for agricultural crops, there's a direct correlation with the price of food. So how much biofuels are needed? Well, in the United States, we devoted all the land available right now for maize. We would only be able to produce ethanol sufficient to satisfy 12% of the demand. And in the case of soybean, it would be 6%. And there's going to be implications, because when we fill up the tank with 25 gallons of ethanol, we will require the amount of grain sufficient to feed one person per whole year. And that has implications for the food crisis that we're talking about. And then obviously the threats of biofuels, the conversion of land devoted to food crops, destruction of forests, monoculture based on polluting agrochemicals. I mean, at the scale that this bean is produced, the amount of herbicide and the amount of fertilizer, chemical fertilizer that goes into the system is very high. And the increasing use of water, and also the use of fuel. I'm sure you know that the arguments of David Pimentel, for example, that questions the energy efficiency of these systems. So, with this introduction, I just wanted to say that, obviously, if we look at who is hungry in the world today, which is increasing, we went from 800 million to 1 billion today. 50% of those hungry, or 50-60%, are in the rural areas. 20% are landless people, and 20% are in the urban area. So the most people that are hungry right now in the world, and and mostly in the rural areas. So where do you have to produce food? Where they are. With what? With what they count on, which is their resources, their knowledge, their seeds, because they can afford. They make less than $1 a day. They cannot afford any other type of technology. And if you want to do something in any country, right now with the crisis even more, all the extension services are broke. They don't even have money for gas. How are you going to implement this? Well, Agra has its own system. They're going to develop these little bags of fertilizer. They're going to be distributed and so on and so on. Even via bicycles and so on. But that's not the reality in the developing world, unless a big corporate foundation like the Gates country. And why is it important that we do this? Because actually, these farmers, the small farmers, are the ones that produce most of the food crops that people are eating anyway. All the other big farmers are into the export business. Go to any country and see what the large farmers are doing. If they're not growing soybean, if they're not growing sugarcane, if they're not growing palm oil, what are they doing? Grapes, whatever. They're not producing food crops. So farmers are very important, small farmers are very important for food security. And I just wanted to show you some examples. If you go to Paraguay, or you go to southern Brazil, these are the landscapes that you see. And they're soybean. This has just been harvested. And the only reason why there's some forest here is because in Brazil there's a law that you have to leave 10% of the mata, of the forest. Otherwise, you get penalized. But if you go to Paraguay, not even that is there. This area here in southern Paraguay, which is most of this area is being now farmed with soybean by Brasileiros, which are Brazilian farmers, large-scale farmers that are going into Paraguay and using their land. This community of farmers is 50 families that are the only ones producing food in a radius of 300 kilometers. And they're doing great because they're selling food. Not only are they self-sufficient in food for themselves, but they're selling food to all the workers of this company. Nobody else is producing food there. This is Pasto, Colombia, where they grow this pasto, this grass, under the orchard trees, in the apple orchards or little pastures and so on. For what? To produce cuy, to feed this cuy. These animals are factories of manure and urine, which then is composted into these systems that you can see here, in lombricultura. With that, they fertilize their gardens, where they produce a variety of different crops. They also feed the fish directly with the feces of this. Why I'm showing you this? Because these farmers with this system fed a city of 25,000 people called Pasto, which was separated from the rest of Colombia because the bridges were blown up by the guerrillas for 1 year. Who fed these people? These farmers. Not Cargill, not Monsanto. They fed them. So there's enough evidence to show that small farms are able to produce enough food and that they produce much more than large farms. And there are many reasons for that. If you go to foodfirst.org and you look at a paper by Peter Rosset called the Multiple Benefits from Small Farms, he has 40 graphs like this, country after country, showing that total output in small farms is much higher than large-scale farms. When you look at total output, you're not looking at just the output of corn, you're looking at the total output of the farm. Country after country, 40 countries with data from FAO show these trends. And the reason? Much more efficiency in the use of land and the local resources, and you're taking advantage with the temporal and the spatial diversity with polycultures. We know that polycultures over yield, when you get a layer value higher than 1, that means you need, for example, 1.5, you need 1.5 hectares of monoculture to produce the same that you produce in 1 hectare of polyculture. The other thing that is important is that these systems are resilient and adapted to climate stresses, which are going to be dominant. Because we have the producers of climate change and the receptors of climate change. And unfortunately, the receptive countries of climate change are the ones that are suffering the most. What did Cuba, that suffered 3 hurricanes last year, have to do with producing any gas emissions compared to the rest of the countries that really had some contribution? So what is interesting is that a lot of the strategies that small farmers have used traditionally can give us cues on how to make the system resilient. Because in California, for example, there's plenty of people doing models about what climate change is going to, especially drought, how is it going to impact productivity, income, this and that. Fine. But what are we going to do about it? How are you going to make the system resilient? How are you going to make the systems produce under those conditions? Well, if you go to the Andes, for example, where there's still 122,000 hectares of terraces farmed the same way as 4,000 years ago in many areas, these guys had a lot to teach us, because one of the things they did was to divide the mountain in agricultural belts, where you would adapt the crops to the changing temperature and humidity conditions, and you would not put, because this was managed communally, you would not put all your crops or your plots in one belt. You would distribute your crops in your parcels in the mountain. So for example, if there's a frequency of disaster as it increases, as you can see here, frost or drought or whatever, you can see that if you had all your plants, all your plots in one belt, you would have much more damage than when you start diversifying and putting your crops or your plots in the mountain in different belts. So it's a way to minimize risk. The water bodies that are in the high Andes, about 3,800 meters above sea level, is another way where farmers have developed these systems. Now there's 40,000 hectares of water bodies still in the region, where water absorbs the heat during the day, releases them at night, changes the microclimate, and therefore you don't have frost. But in addition to that, here there's water, you can have fish, and also water for watering your crops. The muck of the sediment becomes a fertilizer. Because somebody could argue, well, we could develop potatoes that are resistant to frost through transgenic technology. Sure, but where are you going to get the fish? Or where are you going to get the fertilizer? Huh? And all the other and also you're going to grow other crops, because they're not just growing potatoes, they're growing quinoa, and they're growing oyuco, and they're growing many other things. It's a much more multifunctional approach. This is another example in Ecuador. If you go southern Ecuador, in Loja, there is a system called the orillado. The farmers, the hillsides are over there, and in the dry season they cannot grow corn anymore. So the only thing they can do is grow crops in the river that is receding. This is going to dry. But you adapt. So the crops that are near the water, like for example these sweet potatoes, you grow them in this mount, because otherwise they would rot with too much moisture. And as you get away, as the water starts receding, then you plant your crops in a hole, and you take advantage of the deep moisture. There are many systems like that. There's a maíz de cajete, corn cajete in Oaxaca, for example, where farmers planted right after the frosts in March by making a hole, and then with a I don't know how you say, a stick, make a hole and put that corn variety there, and then it will germinate without water by taking advantage of the deep moisture in the soil. So there are many techniques that farmers are using to deal with this. And then finally, the study that Eric Jimenez would be here with Mitch, after Mitch in Central America, he compared 1,000 farms that had polycultures and agroforestry patterns versus monoculture systems, and he found that the monoculture systems suffer much more damage by mudslides. I went to this area in Honduras, and if you walk 100 meters that way, this is the farm that you find that doesn't have almost no destruction. It's really interesting. When I went now to Cuba about 2 weeks ago, most of the farms that were diversified suffered less damage than the monocultures, much less. And the farmers were testifying. Nobody's done a study, but that's the reality. So this is the data from the amount of mudslides you can see in Honduras, where it was the worst. Much more ecological resiliency in the system that were diversified with agroforestry system, with soil conservation, with mucuna cover crops, etc., etc. The other thing that is very important is that small farmers maintain diversity as an insurance to meet future environmental change or social and economic needs. And that many researchers have concluded variety richness enhances productivities and reduces yield variability. Where do you go if you want to get that particular run race or that local variety? So small farmers. You don't go to the big farmers. So they're providing a huge service to humankind by maintaining in situ this genetic diversity. And this genetic diversity, as you know, is the product of the coevolution between cultural diversity and natural diversity. So as these cultures disappear, so the genetic diversity, and as the genetic diversity disappears through genetic erosion, so the cultural diversity disappears. They are interlinked. So a lot of farmers emphasize the maintenance of their varieties because there's a lot of rituals also associated with this. There's not only an agronomic basis of growing particular varieties, because there are certain varieties here that have only ritual uses, and others have consumptive uses. And we know that these varieties are much more adaptable to the marginal environments. I mean, the miracle varieties of the Green Revolution work well in the optimal situations, but most of the farmers are in marginal situations, you know, when the drought comes and so on. And there's a study that looks at, for example, the wheat varieties of the Green Revolution with the native varieties, and definitely they're much more productive than the Green Revolution varieties. But when you look at it in respect to water use, then you can see that the native variety is much more important. So my question to Mr. Borla, who is still around, okay, is what happens when the drought comes? Which is going to come, because that's what is being predicted as a climate change scenario in many, many parts of the third world. What are we going to do about it? And then what is really interesting is that the seeds have become the symbol of the peasant resistance. The MST movement, the Landes Peasant movement in Brazil, and the Via Campesina, they say, sementes, patrimonio del pueblo, al servicio de la humanidad. That means seeds, patrimony of the people, at the service of humankind, which is very different from what FAO wants to say under the pressure of corporations, that the seeds are humankind patrimony. No, sir. They're patrimony of the local people, and they will put it at the service of humankind under certain conditions. If they're compensated for their service and that they're not going to be patented. This is one of the big campaigns of Via Campesina, is actually no patents on life. This is the seed fairs where farmers exchange the seeds as a symbol of their resistance. If you go to Santa Catarina in the south of Brazil, every 2 years they have a seed fair where 10,000 farmers exchange more than 100 tons of seeds. And there's a continuous exchange of seeds between them as a symbol of maintaining the diversity, but also of spreading that wealth among them. And finally, I think it's very important to understand that small farmers are experimenters. This is Oaxaca, a region where it has been devastated by failed economic programs. And there is a group there called SEDICAM, which is an NGO of small farmers, actually, which have decided to stay there and to restore the landscapes of that area. Obviously, what they do is at the top of the mountain, they reforest. This is Pinus oaxacensis. It's not Pinus radiata. It's a local pine species. They do a lot of soil conservation systems, and then they emphasize a lot on water harvesting as a way to increase productivity because there's a dry period. It's not that there's no water. It's just that sometimes it counts for 2 months, and that's it. So water harvesting is very important in this whole landscape restoration approach. And then there is possibilities of doing no-till agriculture organically. But this is not an invention of researchers, although I know that researchers are working on this. This has been done by farmers in southern Brazil, in Paraná, Santa Catarina, for more than 30 years. What they do is they grow what they call un cóctel de coberturas, a cocktail of cover crops, which has 9, 12 species, but there's always 3 present. One is, how do you call the one that you're working with? Right. Right. Raphanistrum, which is the Raphanus, the fodder Raphanus, and vetch, Visavilosa. Those are always present. The rest, you can put some peas, some fava beans, and so on. And what they do is it grows during the fall and winter, and then in the early spring they come in with a roll of faca, which is a roller, which is basically a tree trunk. That might have some knives like that, but not necessary. And then what it does is smothers the crop. Usually when it's flowering, when it's a time that has much more nitrogen. And then they basically just smother it as a mulch and then they come with a no-till planter, animal traction, and they plant their crops into the mulch. And you can see that there's some regrowth of weeds, especially the cover crop, but there's no weeds there. The question is, why is it that the weeds don't germinate, and the corn and beans do? Well, if it's allelopathic, it's going to inhibit everything. In your case, you have to watch about that. Well, the point is this. They know, they haven't measured it, they don't know the concept, but they say, el suelo se calienta, the soil becomes hot, but only in the first 2 or 3 centimeters. And that's where 90% or 95% of the seed bank is. So what you got to do is plant the crops, the corn and beans, which have big seeds, deeper. And they germinate free of any toxicity. So we're doing a couple of master students' theses on this because we want to understand the ecological basis of why the system works that way. And with that, what we want to promote is the ecological principles, not the technique, because the cover crops can change in different areas. So we need to understand in agroecology more processes rather than the recipes. A lot of work with cover crops are being done by the MST settlements, and many times they get the worst lands in Brazil. So there's a lot of soil restoration that needs to be done by incorporating different kinds of cover crops that are going to enrich the soil. And here you can see a group that has successfully established and restored their soil fertility in many of these settlements. And many of these settlements are actually totally food secure areas. They are free of transgenic, free of agrotoxics, and food sovereign regions. But also what is interesting, they're also growing agrofuels. But they're doing it in combination. For example, you go to the Nordeste in Brazil, they do it in combination. In this particular case, they already harvest the corn and beans, but they intercrop it with the corn and beans, so they don't sacrifice agricultural land. You can produce your residuos comunis there, but you can produce many other crops that are going to have the production of oleo vegetal with this machine that only costs $2,000, so the cooperatives can afford it, where on the one side comes out the oil, and the other side comes some stuff that they put in the compost, but this oil goes directly into the trucks and the tractors, so it's for their own consumption. It's not to get in the business. So the MST has a decision now that 10% of their land can be devoted to agrofuels, but for energy sovereignty. And the same thing is happening in Cuba. In Cuba, 10% of the area, especially 100 in the big plantations of the government, 100 hectares can be devoted for sugarcane for ethanol production, which will allow the energy production for 1,000 hectares of food production. Okay? And then there are territories that are becoming independent. Because, for example, in this case in Santa Rosa de Lima, in Santa Catarina, the organic farmers gained political power. One of them became the mayor, and they declared the region libre de agrotoxicos, free of agrotoxics. And here the farmers have their diversified systems where they have pastures and vegetable crops and pisciculture and things like that. And they have their own local markets where they sell cheaper than conventional. And that way they are able to do what is called a participatory solidarity certification system. They don't have to pay for certification. They are able to sell cheaper than the conventional farmers. But also, they have to develop agro-industries because they are involved in what is called the institutional markets. That is, because they gain political power and municipalities have a lot of independence, they declare that all the schools and hospitals have to serve food that comes from the small farmers. And imagine that tomorrow Cornell University says all the food that is going to be served in this campus has to come from the local farmers, and we're going to assure them a market. Well, they cannot show up with just vegetables. They have to have cheese and ham and this. So these farmers have to produce 42,000 lunches a week for the schools and the hospitals. And they have to have eggs, and they have to have ham, and cheese, and this, and that, and that. For that, they have to become very, very, very organized. And what is interesting, it takes them out of that neoliberal model of economic competition because it's an institutional market. They're doing a service to the people by providing organic, high-quality, nutritious food. They're conserving their environment much more, and at the same time, the government is saving money. They save 5% than before. And I just wanted to show you what's happening in Cuba recently. I think that you more or less know that there has been a land redistribution, cooperatives and so on, but now anybody can petition for land. They can give you up to 13 hectares. There's 100 petitions already, 100,000 petitions of land, and they have already distributed 40,000. Okay, so professors and researchers and doctors, anybody can petition for land. And that's going to have a huge impact on what's in the situation in Cuba. And the other advance, although you know that urban agriculture has been promoted tremendously in Cuba, the most important thing, the latest figures, 383,000 organic urban gardens nationwide, producing 1,500,000 tons of vegetables in 50,000 hectares. And the productivity is between 10 to 20 kilos per square meter per year of edible material. An unprecedented level of productivity with no external inputs of a chemical nature. And the cooperatives are producing a lot of crops. I'm not going to go into detail, but using animal traction, using organic materials, compost, and so on. 7,000 liters, for example, this particular cooperative per cow per year. 0.5 tons per year of those, and then of pigs, 6 tons. And I just wanted to show you the concept that these systems are energy sovereign also. They're technologically sovereign, and they're energy sovereign and food sovereign. Because you can see biogas becomes a major promoter of energy in the system. So basically, the concept that we're managing right now is that food sovereignty is not possible if you don't have energy and technological sovereignty. That the three have to go together. And the three have to be guided by ecological principles to deal with this resiliency. Resiliency to what? To peak oil prices and to climate change, which are the major shocks that are going to be affecting agricultural systems in the future. And where were the secrets of Cuba? First, protection against dumping, because it's isolated, so it's not subject to the vagaries of free trade. Access to land reform. The organized people, the farmers' organizations, certainly the support of the state, and then agroecological technologies as a way forward. And obviously the campesino movement, the horizontal transfer of technology is a major component. And it's interesting, as I said, that UNEP, FAO, and many others are saying that of the benefits of agroecology that needs to be scaled up, and there's three major reasons. It's adapted to the complex environments where most of the vulnerable groups are. It's a participatory process that involves these vulnerable groups, and it provides resiliency to the major shocks that we're expecting that are going to be affecting agriculture. I just wanted to end with some developments that I think that are very important, and maybe here in this country at some point we should come up with the same, is that there are countries in Latin America that are already putting the concept of food sovereignty, right to food, etc., food security into their constitutions. That is Ecuador, Bolivia, Guatemala, Brazil, and Venezuela. What is interesting about, here you can see what's happening in Venezuela. The number of ecological hectares by state is growing, especially in Yaracuy, especially because of these programs of extension that the government is implementing. Here you can see the number of, again, the number of farmers that are adopting the systems. They're following very much the Cuban model by having biological control labs. You know, Cuba has 280 CREAs, which are the centers for the production of beneficial insects, 73 biofertilization labs, and so on and so on. So they're taking action in Venezuela in this, what they call the new Bolivarian agrarian model. This is the scaling up of the agroecological experiences in Brazil. And Brazil is very important as an example because Brazil has two ministries of agriculture. You hear about Brazil and Lula promoting, biofuels, but they have a small-scale agricultural ministry called the Ministerio de Desenvolvimiento Agrario, which has more money than the other one, and has much more policies that promote agroecology. And actually, the guys that are in charge are agroecologists. They all did their PhDs in agroecology in Spain with Eduardo Sevilla Guzman. And every of this, one of these yellow spots are agroecological experiences, because you have the government support, you have the farmers organized in cooperatives or rural social movements, including MST, and you have a tremendous agroecological research and extension apparatus. Virtually all the universities, state or federal, and the state, and including BRAPA, have agroecologists that are involved and linked with this agroecological movement. So the scaling up of this is tremendous in Britain. So this leads us then to the concept of food sovereignty, which is the people's right to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and the right to define their own food and agricultural systems. But this can happen at the national level, but is crystallized usually at the local level. And these are kind of the requirements. We have to have agricultural food crops out of the WTO, just prices for farmers, access to land, fair access to local markets, no dumping, and subsidies for family farming, as well as access to local seeds, credit, and agroecological production models. And I wanted to point your attention to the objectives of the Via Campesina as a very good movement to link up if you really want to support this type of initiatives. MST also in Brazil. So in conclusion, I would like just to say that humankind needs to support small farmers because they are very important in food security. They are very important in conserving biodiversity, agrobiodiversity. They are models of innovation, and they are models of resiliency. And such economies, if we based our countries in this model of small-scale agriculture, will ensure sustainable production of healthy, agroecologically produced, accessible food for all, and will provide key economic sectors. And Eric Jimenez and I just wrote an editorial that hopefully will be published in some newspaper. We were asking the question, why is it that in the economic recovery plan of President Obama, small farm revitalization doesn't show up at all? They're talking about creating jobs for more highways and more bridges, for more consumption of energy and more food miles, and they have 10% unemployment in the cities where people are collecting unemployment and they can't find jobs. Even if they wanted to, they can't find jobs. Why don't we send them to the rural areas and start promoting these models? Maybe things could change. It's just a question I have. Thank you very much.
So we have time for some questions. The reception is also here, though, so we can see how it goes, and then feel free to sort of mingle and talk to Miguel when we one-on-one afterwards. But we can start off with maybe 15, 20 minutes of questions. And also, I'm sorry, after that, at 6:30, there's a potluck downtown, so if you're interested in that, see Alice and Jack. And that,
It was a wonderful and inspiring talk. Thank you very much. And in particular, thank you very much for bringing up these very positive examples of success and performance, in particular in South America. The thing is, it must be under incredible pressure by the big companies. So you showed this square of the big companies now working together that together form an incredible sort of group that influence and corrupt governments pretty much, and they probably the most important reason why Obama's project and Obama's movie doesn't go into positively encouraged. What do you think, or how do you think can this lobby be broken to make it a global movement?
Well, I believe that the way this is going to solve is going to be solved through social movements that are going to be confronting this model directly. I don't believe that the governments can do anything because they're tied up, their hands are tied up. And as a matter of fact, if you look at what happens in Brazil, even under Lula, who is supposed to be a leftist government, the MST took more land now than when Cardoso was in power. Because they're not waiting for negotiations. There's no room for that. There's no time for that. They're at war, and they need to actually, it's urgent for them to solve their problems. And so I see that the way it has been solved in Brazil, for example, is, okay, we need land reform. And the government says, okay, but we need to go through the legislature process, and we need to Congress approval. No, wait, man, we're going to take the land. That's it. 1 million families already took the size of Italy in Brazil. That's it. What happened in Bolivia? They elected a president, but at the same time, the rural movements are still going strong. What happened in Ecuador? They ousted presidents. They didn't allow in Bolivia the privatization of water. I mean, these people depend on these resources, and they're going to take them because they belong to them. They historically were taken from them. So I see that the only way that we can solve these problems is with social movements. I don't see any other way. And here is where you have to take a stand as a scientist. In Berkeley, obviously, they don't believe that a scientist can take a political stand because science is neutral. Well, I don't know how neutral you can be when you get $500 million from BP, but then you have to be prepared to pay the price. And be prepared to pay the price as a scientist, especially the young generation here. We need to take stands because the situation is critical. We're at a tipping point that we need to take sides. Are we going to push an industrial model that's going to lead us to a certain destiny, or are we going to support another model, an alternative model? And this is the opportunity now to do it. The whole economic capitalist system is in crisis. Nobody knows how to solve it. Who knows what's going to happen? And this is the time when we can take action. But that's going to have a cost. And the question is whether you want to take it or not, whether you want to confront it. I have decided I'm actually going to be retired from Berkeley, and I'm going to devote the next whatever years I'm left of my life to work with the social movement, with the small farmers, because I believe that that's the model that we need to use. There's no other model. There's no other alternative. They can tell you what they want, Gates and ABM and all these people, biofuels, transgenics. Yeah, obviously, they're going to tell you that. But they're unsustainable. They're not going to work. And if we really want to solve the problem of environmental integrity, we want to confront climate change, we need a totally different system. So that's my answer to the question.
I am Brazilian and now farming in Brazil. And when I see the figures and the picture that you show, I don't recognize my country.
What do you grow? Soybean?
No. I have a small farm of cattle. The MST is extremely common in advertising. More than 80% of the people that was placed in land have or left or sold or become more impoverished. The amount of money from government to maintain these people has almost $1 billion a year now over the goal. So it's not self-sufficient. It's a very few places where it works. And those places are where they have invaded or they have obtained the extremely good soil. Other than that, it has not worked. So I apologize for disagreeing so.
Maybe we can talk about specifically what farms are you talking about, because I go to Brazil a lot and I work with the MST a lot, and I've seen many farms that have actually many of them grow transgenic crops, many of them grow biofuels, but now the policy that is coming from the cúpula is to convert all to agroecological systems, and that's going to need training, that's going to need more research, that's going to need all that. That map that was there was not produced by me. That was produced by ABA, which is the Asociación Brasileña de Agroecología, which is a bunch of professors and researchers. So if you want to doubt their integrity, well, that's your problem. But that's a map that was produced by them. And I'm not trying to romanticize the MST as an example. I'm just saying that it's a movement that is moving in a certain direction, And the reason why they take the land is because of historical reasons in your country of iniquities of land distribution. And what other model is there then? More sugarcane? More soybean?
The question is that their model has not worked so far.
Yeah.
That's my only point.
Why it hasn't worked? I mean, for example, it's interesting. All these agroecological experiences that I have shown you have worked so far without any support. You know, when people tell me, I want to compare organic with conventional, well, it's interesting. Conventional agriculture has received all the support from the industry, from the universities, from the research centers. How much of your budget in Cornell University goes to conventional versus organic? Probably organic, 1%. California is 1%. And then you make these comparisons, and the yields of organic farmers are 5 or 10% lower. That's it. So you guys, with all your research for 50 years, with money from corporations, with money from the government, with the best universities, with the best research centers and so on, we're only able to increase the yields 10% over what the farmers can do? What about if we have given all that money to the farmers or to the NGOs that are promoting this? The millions and millions of dollars for 50 years. Maybe we would be in a different situation. And why is it that we are insisting in the same approach? More biotechnology, more biofuels, more agra, more green revolutions. Why is it that? And we see that the system is collapsed already. I see it collapse. The capitalist system is collapsed. I don't know if anybody else has a different opinion. Just go and check your savings. So all I'm saying is these are possibilities. And so in some places they're working well. In some places there are a lot of deficiencies, obviously. But at least something, we need to invest in it. And the only person that is investing on this, interestingly enough, is somebody that is not very popular in this country. It's called Presidente Chavez. He created a university in Barinas, Venezuela, to train sons and daughters of peasants on agroecology. It's an agroecology university, a 5-year degree. And they're going to train for free, 500 per year. And their purpose is to go back. They're selected by the communities because their purpose is to go back to the communities, but that's going to take some time. There's no other university that is doing this. There's no other government that's putting and betting on a different approach. So why not give it an opportunity? We already gave a lot of opportunities to the land grant system. And look at where we're at. Okay? Let's give an opportunity to alternative approaches. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask if you could shed light on this basic disconnect I see between arguments of conventional agriculturalists and agroecology proponents. Because I'm in nutrition. I've been to a lot of talks about food security. And there always comes a time when somebody says, well, conventional approaches yield more. And then the agroecologist says, no, agroecology yields more. And then the conventionalist says, no, you're wrong. You're condemning people to living an old life. Conventional yields more. And I'm sympathetic to the agroecology side because as a nutritionist, I see how when people grow a lot of different kinds of food, they eat a lot of different kinds of food. But is that the difference? Is it the way you measure yield? What is the disconnect between those disagreements?
Actually, as I said before, the problem, if you're interested in that comparison because of solving the world hunger problem, that's not the issue. There's enough food right now to feed 9 billion people. So that's not the issue. So what that they yield more? The question is for how long and at what cost. So we know that industrial agricultural systems, if you put a lot of fertilizer, a lot of chemicals and so on, they're going to yield more per commodity, not a total output. And the question is for how long? Not too long, because then the system is going to collapse. Because you undermine the sustainability of the system. You put a lot of chemical fertilizer, especially nitrogen chemical fertilizer. You acidify the soil and eventually the system breaks down. Or you use a lot of pesticides and the pests become resistant, or you use Roundup and the weeds become resistant. So there's a time when nature takes care of it all. And then what cost? The cost is not only yield, per unit of water, per unit of energy, per unit of health, per per unit of obesity, however you want to measure it. You know, that's the point. The cost, the social, ecological, the cultural cost. And I think there's enough evidence that the cost will be huge. The problem is that we haven't accounted for it because they're all externalities. You see, industrial agriculture is very good at producing externalities, but then don't become accountable. You know, if Monsanto had to pay for the impact they have on the environment with their technology, they would be broke. And industrial agriculture in this country would not function if it's not subsidized. And even more would not function if you had to pay for the externalities. I mean, for example, just look at that dead zone in the, where is that, in New Mexico? The Gulf of Mexico. Let's put a price on that. And let's charge the guys that were responsible for that. Okay? So I don't think that that's I'm not interested anymore in those studies that compare conventional with organic or agroecological. I'm not interested in that. I think it leads nowhere. It's a different model. We need to move totally into a new model with new parameters because the reality is just different now. We're in a different world right now. We need a totally different system, a new paradigm. Yeah.
Interested in your opinion on transgenics for abiotic stress.
Well, there's a lot of promises. Like we're going to be able to grow transgenics for climate change, for drought resistance, but I don't see that they're coming out because, you know why? Because there's no market. Because those problems, I mean, in the third world, small farmers are not going to be able to buy that technology, and therefore the investors are not going to get back their money that they invested in the technology. That's one problem. But the other one is that I don't think they have the science ready because all these things are polygenic, and that's why you have the monogenic technologies out, because they're very easy. Polygenic and much more complex. And the third one, let's say that you're a good guy in your heart, and you found a gene that you want to transfer into a plant, and this plant is going to become drought resistant. Great. That's a novel thing. I don't doubt it. The minute you're ready to put it out, you have to deal with about 20 different corporations because all the accompanying technologies are patented. That's what happened with the golden rice. The golden rice was a public-funded project until they found out that they had to deal with about 20 different patents. Not of the gene that they found, but to increase the beta-carotene, but of the accompanying technology, the markers, the vectors, the this, the that, everything is patented. So that's the end of free technology or public goods.
Yeah. I don't think the private sector just opens up opportunities for people to make money where they think they could. I understand they're in the business for making money, but an example like golden rice, which could help a lot of people. Fortunately, a lot of people don't want to eat yellow rice. That's one of the biggest problems because they're used to.
You know what's the biggest problem with golden rice?
But it's not.
Besides that, it's yellow or orange, which would be like having blue French fries here. Something would happen because
That's a cultural problem.
Because there's a cultural issue here. But you know, all the weeds that are eliminated in those rice paddies that actually farmers actually ate, just like I showed you in the chinampas, they have 400 milligrams of beta-carotene per gram, as opposed to 4 that has the beta-carotene. So you need to eat 3 kilos of that rice in order to get what you would get from 10 grams of those weeds.
That's true from golden rice 1. Golden rice 2 is actually, you'll get sufficient with.
Right, so it's a blind solution to a blind problem. I mean, why not keep the traditional systems that are diversified and not only produce beta-carotene, but produce all kinds of vitamins and all kinds of nutrients?
I think it's a complex issue, and I think there's a lot of sides. I just, one point, and then I'll leave it go. I was in Brazil this January, and I saw drought tolerance, transgenic maize growing, and it looked very good. So it is coming out. It will be released. Your opinion on that is your opinion. But just to let you know that.
I just told you about the maíz cajete in Mexico. It's been there for 5,000 years. That grows without water. Why do we need a transgenic variety? Why did they produce a transgenic variety in Brazil? Tell me, who produced it?
Monsanto.
Monsanto with that for what? The cajete is free. You can learn it and you grow it everywhere in the world. You don't have to deal with patents or.
Well, I'm a plant breeder. It's not that easy.
Anybody have?
Thank you.
Yeah.
So when the socialist system collapsed in Eastern Europe, they cut up all the large lands and the small farmers started to work, and that system collapsed within like 3 years also because they were not able to take care of those lands. They didn't have the machinery. They were too small to purchase the machinery, and there was no marketing and distribution system. So that was not very well organized. So do you think these small farmers are going to be able to organize among themselves? And I'm not saying they will create a socialist system, but will they be able to distribute their produce when they make enough that they don't just use for instance?
Yeah, your point is well taken. You know, if you look at the agrarian reform in Chile, which I'm from, when Allende was there and we all supported, it was a failure. If you look at what happened with the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, the land reform was a failure. Why? Because it was not an integral land reform where you have to provide the farmers with the technology, appropriate technology, with the credit and the markets and the research and the extension. You have to do it that way, otherwise it won't work. So I'm not saying that the government doesn't have a role, and I understand what in Eastern Europe that's what happens. So in some cases farmers are well organized and they can do it on their own, but that's not the common reality. They need the support of the government. And you need to have special programs, like Brazil has the Ministerio de Desenvolvimento Agrario, which deals exclusively with family farmers. Good or bad, I think it's good, maybe you think it's not, but that's not the point. We have to create a support system that is going to protect the small farmers. Not only give them all the resources, but protect them from the competition that is unfair out there. There's no way these farmers are going to compete with us, everybody's saying, because the field is not level. Once it's level, with all the support that they need, maybe then you can let them compete. But at the beginning, you have to give them support and protection. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And I think that that's what the concept of integral land reform is. And that's what the Vietnam Casino is pushing.
Do you think that a subsidy, or taking away the subsidies of conventional agriculture would already do the job?
I think conventional agriculture will have to pay its dues, and the one that is going to come up with a deal is nature. I think that not only economics right now is putting a big barrier against industrial agriculture, but I think climate change is going to be. I mean, those huge monocultures are not resilient. Actually, my personal opinion and my personal experience with, for example, transgenic soybean is that when there's a drought, that's when they go. And if you look at all the long-term studies that have been done, comparisons of organic versus conventional agriculture, many times conventional agriculture is 10% more productive. Look at the studies of the motor plots. Look at the study that Lori was involved in Rodale. Long-term studies, I'm talking about 10, 20. There's one in Davis. Conventional is higher. We use all the inputs. When drought comes, organic does better. Always. Well, obviously, I mean, we have rich soils with organic matter that hold 50 times their volume in water. They're increasing water efficiency, but on top of that, they're activating a soil biology that many times, like mycorrhiza, have a huge effect on resistance to drought. So it seems to me that that industrial agriculture is coming to its limits, and the deal is going to be imposed by nature. Well, thank you very much.